Patricia, at Private AI, your mission is to build privacy layer for software. So let's start with the problems you saw, privacy related problems that led you to start the company.
So really in 2019 when we started, the very basics of privacy weren't being done well for 80 to 90% of the data that's collected out there. And that's unstructured data. So that includes text, images, documents, video, audio. And it was just at that time that the technology was ripe to be used for this problem. So we started working on identifying the personally identifiable information that you can find in these documents in the first place. And that's core to any data protection regulation. And a lot of people were either building systems in house, which were subpar and taking away time from their own developers to work on their core product, or they were sending data to third parties that would then put them at more of a privacy risk because you're sharing your customers' data to somebody with somebody else. And that would not only cost them an arm and a leg, but also not provide the results that they wanted. So it seemed like a ripe field to disrupt.
What were the issues with the data, with the results that they got from
Mm.
those sources?
So a lot of the times people use regular expressions in order to identify PII, personally identifiable information. Regular expressions are patterns that you could set, for example, 16 digits, or 4 digits followed by a hyphen, followed by 4 digits, followed by a hyphen. Um, and while these work well when you've got very predictable data, unstructured data tends to not be that predictable. So you could take a call log, for example. Somebody might say, oh yeah, my credit card number that I used to make this purchase is 539. Oh no, I dropped it. I'm sorry. That was 4539279, right? That's not something that you could just capture with one of those patterns. You need the context for that, and you need AI in order to make sense of that kind of data.
Right. So clearly, it's not possible to catch it with the regular expressions, and you need AI. What's your approach at Private AI to fix this?
Yeah, so we use natural language processing in order to understand the data contextually. And we've created machine learning models that have been very heavily modified for speed and accuracy. And we have a huge amount of data that we annotate very meticulously and very expensively over the years, capturing data from a ton of different sources with the help of some of our customers as well. Uh, and that variety, that nitpickiness that we've got linguists taking care of, and that constant iteration for perfection when it comes to annotating the data really makes all the difference in the high level of accuracy that you actually need to have for this task.
And in terms of the KPIs that you focus on, when you compare your results with the industry standard result,
Mhm.
what are those and how do you compare?
Mhm. Yeah. So what we do is we recognize which kinds of personal information are listed by different data protection regulations. When it comes to comparing our system with the other systems out there for this task, we see what our system supports and has in common with these other systems. So we select that subset of entities, and we get data that we have not trained on before, and we test how our system compares to those based on the accuracy. So how much of each entity was missed, how much of each entity was um, uh, selected when it wasn't a particular piece of personal information, and we use that to calculate the accuracy.
Okay. And what kind of accuracy? Give some ballpark of the numbers. What can you get without using private AI versus what you can get with you?
Uh, it depends on the type of data that you're dealing with. We've seen some pretty low accuracies, all the way down to 60%. And with us out of the box without uh, training on particularly similar looking data, we could get above 90%. With similar looking data, we do target above 99% with our customers.
And by similar looking data, you mean the data that you have trained your systems on, or
Correct.
talk about more about that what path to get from 90% to 99%.
Yeah. So by similar looking data, I mean, for example, call logs. If we've trained on several call logs before. If we see more call logs, chances are we'll work really, really well right out of the box on those call logs. When it comes to medical information, if we've seen electronic medical records before, which we have, right out of the box, we work fairly well on those. But then there might be something surprising, like a hospital uses a particular standard of encoding information that isn't fitted to normal natural language. That's something that we need to know about and train our models on before providing a solution that works at 99+% accuracy.
And when you deploy the product at the customer, do you include this fine tuning as part of the implementation, or
Mhm.
what kind of trajectory of accuracy your customers see over time, and what kind of steps they need to perform to get there?
Yeah. Normally, for the customers who care deeply about accuracy, they'll generally create a gold standard themselves because they don't trust anybody to create the gold standard for them. And then they'll use our system to and compare the results of our system with those of other systems, and often including their internal solution. And what we ask is for a small sample of the kind of data that they're going to be using our system on. We train our model on that sample, create synthetic data to see how well it's performing on that kind of information, and keep increasing the training data with that. And then once they've tested our system, the resulting system, without the adaptation and with the adaptation, they could see exactly what it means to be our customer. So, how we can make our model better and better specifically for their particular use case. And what normally happens is we get snippets of data from them over time, and we keep training the model over time, providing updates every 4 to 6 weeks.
And does it happen every 4 to 6 weeks, basically for the lifetime of the system usage, or it kind
It
of the
depends on
pace can change?
the pace can change. It depends on the customer. Sometimes we never hear from people, and they're just happy with the performance as is. Sometimes we hear from people every quarter saying, "Hey, we've noticed that these things were missed. Can you update your model?" And sometimes it's only when their own customers find something that they say, "Hey, our customer flagged this. Can you fix it within 48 hours or a week or something like that?" So we've got pretty quick turnaround time depending on the urgency.
Talk about the typical customer profile.
Hmm. So we sell a lot to basically it's very vertical agnostic. We focused a lot on conversational AI, so chatbots, for example, or automatic speech recognition, customer service. We also have customers that are very large that are in healthcare and in insurance and banking. So it's all about focusing on what the developer needs. Um, it's about building systems in a privacy by design way. So we often deal with people in product or occasionally people who are controlling who gets access to what data within an organization. And we also help with risk assessments. So assessing the risk of a data lake, for example, which is something that's very difficult to do for data loss prevention providers, for example, because they focus on speed much more than they do accuracy. And so that's where we come in and say, this is precisely what you have in your data. Um, Within the customers that we do have, it varies anywhere from pre-seed startups all the way to multi-billion-dollar public companies.
Basically, the two criteria would be you need lots of data with lots of privacy related information inside it, and you need you should have a reason to clean that private identifiable personal identifiable information from the data.
That's right. So oftentimes it's either You want to train your customer service folks how to do better. You want to analyze that data. You want to have PCI or HIPAA compliant information that you could share with a third party or internally within your teams. But in some cases, people don't know what's in their data in the first place. And we can also come in there and tell them, okay, this is the information that might surprise you that was in your data. If you keep this information, you actually have to be PCI or HIPAA compliant, or you're not complying with the GDPR because you have these bits of information within your data. And it's interesting to see what exactly people are collecting without actually knowing it.
If you have to compare that segment that is about audit, find what's in our information compared to uh, anonymize our information, how would they stack in your current customer base?
Hmm. Um, the majority of our customer base are based around de-identifying the data.
And in terms of the de-identification, one thing is to be great at catching PII. The other thing often is to replace it with the dummy data, but still properly built so that you can use it to train your ML models or do other things and don't screw up the whole uh, next steps of the pipeline because you kind of changed the data in a way that made it worse. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. So we generate synthetic personal information. And the way that we do that is by replacing names with fake names, locations with fake locations, numbers with contextually relevant and structurally uh, uh, maintained patterns. And that makes such a difference when it comes to training machine learning models because you're keeping one as much information as you possibly can from the original data, but also you're preventing the model from memorizing the personally identifiable information, which is a huge question mark when it comes to the ethics and what data protection regulations are going to end up doing about those models. Um, and in addition to that, because your models are used to seeing very natural looking data, because it's contextually relevant data that this person identifiable information was replaced with, it also looks very natural. So you won't be suffering downstream model accuracy loss for a lot of tasks like topic modeling or sentiment analysis or things like that, chatbot trading.
And if the same data, same record emerges multiple times within the sets of records, do you preserve in synthetic data the same thing? So it's kind of through the data, it's still identical type of synthetic information.
Yeah, great question. So it depends. If it's all sent at once into the API, it's a REST API that runs in your environment, then yes, it is an option to have, for example, Artem replaced by the same name repeatedly. Um, it really depends on what the customer needs. Normally, the best thing to do is to tie as little data as possible together to reduce the risk of re-identification. But there are certain occasions when you really need to tie that information together in order to uh, do research, for example, in healthcare.
Talk about some of the customers that currently use your system and what kind of impact it had on their operations.
Okay, let's see. So we've got customers that use our system as a PII firewall, for example. So by a PII firewall, I mean different parts of an organization are going to be sending data to a data team or to another part of the same organization. And you have access control in place for specific files. You have access control in place for allowing different roles to have access to different parts of a data set or a data lake. And where we come in is we can give you very minute access control. So you're able to say, this team is allowed to look at these documents, but not with credit card information, not with social security numbers. And that opens up a whole world of possibilities for them to make that data useful and unlock value without increasing the risk for their customers. In other cases, we've made a huge difference in terms of how quickly people can assess their data. One of our customers, for example, was quoted $1 million for assessing the risk of a data lake that they had. And it would have taken a year for their provider to be able to give them that assessment. We can do that in way less time for much less money. uh, and where that saves them a bunch of money, headache, time, and in addition to that, gives them a realistic assessment of their data that's very important in a way that reduces the risk for their customers, because the faster they have that assessment, the better. We've also helped customers reduce the amount of spend that they have internally with regards to building their own privacy technology, because they couldn't find a provider that was as accurate as they wanted or that could run in their environment, for instance.
Talk about the accuracy in general. What is good enough? 90%, 95, 99, 99.999. What's the approach there?
It depends on the task. And none of the regulations actually tell you what's good enough except for HIPAA. HIPAA says you can have a 0.04% risk of re-identification. How you calculate that 0.04% risk of re-identification depends on the amount of data that you've collected about different individuals. So if you have, for example, 3 medical records and one person can be re-identified in those 3 medical records, you've got a third chance of being able to re-identify an individual. But all of a sudden, you keep those 3 medical records and then you add another 10,000 files on top for other individuals that you know are de-identified properly. You've still got the same individual that can be re-identified, but all of a sudden you're satisfying HIPAA compliance. So it's tricky to say, but basically you want it to be as accurate as possible. And the thing is, humans are far from perfect. When humans are annotating the data, they make a lot of mistakes. And where we can come in is make sure that we get higher accuracy than humans. And if you need to, on top of that, have some sort of expert determination, the way a lot of healthcare institutions do when they're sharing data with third party, you could do a statistical sample of the data and then determine whether things were properly identified.
Right, that was my question about how do you control in production the quality of your system?
Hmm.
Do you use sampling and kind of check manually some of the customer data?
It's so we have a rule to never look at our customers' data unless they ask us to, or unless they send us the data themselves. Um, so most of the time, what happens is our customers are looking at their own data and they have their own specific requirements. We can come in and do some consulting with regards to what else their data needs, how else their data needs to be processed in order to be compliant with different regulations. Um, but really, a lot of the times they tend to have a good understanding of what they want, and they'll let us know if there's anything that's missing from what we've provided.
And they prefer to check the results and see if something slept through the cracks. They will
Yeah.
basically calculate that if it's still 99% or it's lower, and then we'll let you know. Okay, makes sense. And I keep returning to that 1 year you mentioned. This is insane. In a sense that by the time they will check the data lake, it seems the new data lake of a bigger size will emerge over that next year, and then you're back to the square one. Uh,
Yeah.
you your system is definitely way better and extremely important too. Even covering this one case is already a huge achievement and a huge contribution to the operations of every company that needs to worry about PII. Let's talk about AI systems powering your system capabilities. you mentioned that you had to develop a custom model, that set of models that run much faster. So talk about the overall architecture of your AI systems and what kind of most important things you had to deal with and overcome to build it.
Yeah. Well, one of the major challenges is getting these models to run very quickly. And so there are a number of techniques that our tech team uses in order to make sure that models are properly modified so that our own customers aren't spending an arm and a leg when they're running the models in their environment. And that's something that even a lot of public companies who have APIs have not done properly yet. And so their margins are much lower than they could be. So that makes a big difference in terms of cost savings for our customers, because if they were to build something in-house, it's very difficult to find the expertise required to make those models run quickly. And for annotation, we've got a very talented team of data managers. We've got a very talented team of annotators that we handpick. And so we go through training a number of data annotators for a bunch of different languages. And we have to iterate over the data set every time that we have to change the way an entity works, or anytime we need to add a new entity. And anytime we need to add a new entity, we have to review the entire data set. And so we often get the question, can we annotate our own data with your system? And I mean, a lot of the times, because it takes so much effort to train somebody to annotate properly for all the different types of PII, and because it takes a lot of effort to iterate over the data every time that we need to modify, add a new entity, anytime we need to see where the accuracy might not be as good, that makes it very difficult for a third party to come in and start labeling. And so that whole process is managed by a team of very talented linguists. Some of them are PhD qualified, some of them are in PhD programs. And so they're very meticulous about how language works and how to ensure that we capture all of the right patterns within language as well.
What was the most surprising discovery for you personally when you dived into the world of data annotation?
Most surprising. I did quite a bit of data annotation beforehand. What was the most surprising aspect of it? Finding the right data sources is really tricky. I guess it's not that surprising. But when you look at the licenses, when you look at the variation that needs to happen across a very solid data set, when you look at the variation that needs to happen across different locales in the world and across different languages, it's just a huge amount of different entities that need to be annotated. So we support 47 different languages. We support 50 above 50 entity types. So 50 times 47 is a lot of different things to keep track of.
It is, for sure. Okay, let's talk about the way you build the company, and we can actually talk about procuring that initial data set as well here. So, but before that, I think your journey, you were on an academia track, I think, and then you decided to start the company. So, what was the trigger there?
I actually decided to start a PhD in order to start a company and started working on acoustic forensics. So, who's speaking and recording, what kind of educational background they have, and all of these things can really improve automatic speech recognition. But while working with it, it was very clear that there were two major problems. One, if you do get access to the information that you need in order to make these systems work well, uh, you've got a major privacy issue on hand. The second thing is, because of the major privacy issue on hand, engineers often don't have access to the data that they need in order to improve these systems. So started working on privacy preserving natural language and spoken language processing. I'm mixing homomorphic encryption with NLP. Homomorphic encryption lets you compute on encrypted data. So you encrypt a 2, you encrypt a 3, add them together, decrypt it, and you get a 5, for example. Um, Spun out the first version of private AI in 2017 that was based on privacy preserving or homomorphic encryption based semantic search, and then scrapped it because it wasn't going to scale. And in 2019 started this version, which was really based on um, taking apart the privacy problem in its fundamentals and seeing what are people missing in the very basics and what can we do to make developers have access to technology that lets them create privacy by design solutions.
The first iteration you said wouldn't scale. What were
Mm-hmm.
the issues there?
A few issues. One, it's very hard to find developers who are willing to learn how to code using homomorphic encryption. The other issue is that it's it's a useful component of a larger privacy enhancing technology solution, but it in and of itself, it's not necessarily the main component that should be solving a lot of the privacy issues out there. So it's very useful if, for example, you want to, like Microsoft, use it as a tool to make password management safer. It's very useful if you have a fairly structured database that um, you want to check, for example, if a particular piece of information occurs in that database. But what you've got happening there is you've got a client sending encrypted data to a server who's doing the processing and then sending the results back to the client. And you can't have that server see the data, and that client often can't see the algorithm from the server. And there are very few use cases in which that is the most practical way that you can make this happen in a privacy preserving way. Alternatively, you can deploy the model or whatever it is that you're doing on the user's device if they care about privacy that much. Um, and a lot of the times you often need to look at the data as a developer in order to make sure that you're doing the right thing with it. Um, and so the limitation of those use cases was another one. And also explaining the technology to people and why it's important. It is quantum safe technology, which means that so far, no quantum algorithm has broken the encryption scheme. That's it's lattice based encryption a lot of the time, but that's beyond, the ability to encrypt in a quantum safe way, actually computing on the data in the encrypted domain with the technological limitations, like not being able to do non-polynomial operations like ReLU, and with the speed limitations. That's it really corners you into a smaller set of use cases.
Gotcha. I wonder, how did the transition happen from the first model to the current product?
Mm. So after I scrapped this idea, spent another year doing research, and then started talking to a bunch of different people about what kind of problems they were facing. And while thinking about different natural language processing applications to build, and how they would be privacy preserving, it was really clear that one, you often need to see the data, so this privacy preserving technology needs to allow for that. Um, and it was obvious that it had to be efficient if you're going to be processing a ton of information. Uh, and so redacting the personal information seemed like the best thing to do. And looking at all of the options that were out there, nothing would actually deploy within the customer's environment the way that we were envisioning it. So, for example, in iOS, in browser, in Android, in addition to on prem and private cloud. Ultimately, we built prototypes for all of those systems as well as for image and video, and we got the most traction for text in on-prem and private cloud. I really hope that one day we'll end up deploying things like this on the edge, but for now, it's still very server centric.
So it's about a year of time after you grabbed your first company that you kind of took to look into other fields? And did you have many options, or kind of that was the one and it was clear from the get-go that this is going to be the one you're going to pursue?
It was it wasn't clear from the get-go, but you know, you got to do a lot of hypothesis testing when you're trying to decide what to go after. And then speaking to a bunch of different people about this problem, and the fact that they were trying to solve this internally was a really good flag with regards to what to work on.
And how about the first customers, the design partners? How did you go about recruiting those?
So we already had, when we got our first real customer, we already had an MVP. And so they were in a pickle because their own customers wanted a solution for this, and they didn't necessarily want to build this in house. And they signed on in 2 weeks, and right off the bat, we're fairly happy with how well our system worked.
That's a miracle. How about the actually stumbling upon that customer? Was it
How did we
just a
stumble upon?
chance, or
It
was
was
it a
luck.
like, yeah?
It was luck. We were talking to one of the other portfolio companies at Forum Ventures, formerly known as Enterprise. They were the first fund to give us a term sheet, and we're part of our pre-seed round. And they said, "Oh, I know such and such company who's trying to solve this problem right now," and made the intro. And then, yeah, they were the first customer, and they've been super supportive and amazing.
And you did your pre-seed round before you had that customer, so you did a pre-seed to
Yes.
build the MVP.
Yes. Well, we actually built the MVP before the pre-seed. We were
Okay.
just making it better and better after the pre-seed. We had a very friendly customer before we did the pre-seed round. They never ended up using our technology, but I do appreciate the financial support.
And for the pre-seed, what were the proof points that you brought to the table of investors to convince them that they should back the company?
So proof points, it was more, this is the technology, this is the vision. Um, Jonah Medanek from Forum Ventures was the first one to really believe in the product and the vision. So they were an intro from he was introduced to me by Chad Bain from Osler, who's one of our lawyers, and had been super supportive since the first version of Private AI. And I walked into Jonah's office. This was March 2020, before everything shut down. And I thought, okay, this is just going to be like any other conversation. It's just gonna be a no, and it's not going to be a particularly interesting investor. So I just go in there. I start telling him about everything that we've been through, what our vision was, what we were looking for, um, and he was able to answer all of the B2B SaaS questions that we had for months within a matter of 30 minutes. And that was already an incredibly great sign. He is very excited about privacy, really believes privacy is the future. And in that room, within that 1 hour meeting, he said, I want to give you guys $100,000. So we went through the investment committee for Forum Ventures, then Excel Prize. And during that process, we also got introduced by another investor to Differential Ventures. And Differential Ventures is a fund out of New York, really fantastic partners. They they ended up becoming the first check in the door. They like to point out, um, and then Forum Ventures came in with the second check, but they did have the first term sheet. For the first customer, we started building things that were specific to their vertical, and we were able to iterate on that fairly quickly because we knew exactly what they wanted. We knew exactly what kind of how the annotation process should look, and we had that all set up already. What they said was they're buying into what we're going to be, not necessarily what we had right off the bat. So uh, they they said specifically, we could try to build this ourselves, but we know that if we did that, you're already going to be, because you're focusing on this problem, so much farther ahead of us every year. So there's no point. We'll just buy your product.
What made them take a chance on you, you think? You said the product wasn't yet there, so they had to work with you and hope that you will eventually deliver. So what was it?
I think it was the speed of iteration and the reliability of the solution right off the bat. So because our CTO was a he was in charge of projects where if he made one mistake, it would cost the company he was working for $1 billion right off the bat. So he's very meticulous about very, very high quality products. And so even if the model wasn't necessarily quite there yet in terms of the scope and the accuracy and the speed that we wanted, it was deployable in a reliable way, which is already something that uh, a lot of companies struggle with.
This focus on privacy and this very meticulous approach, does it reflect on your culture? How do you build your culture at private AI, and what kind of people do you hire?
I'm really proud of the culture that we have. Uh, what kind of okay? Does the culture okay, that's a lot of questions to unpack. Does the culture reflect of privacy reflect in our company? Yes. So we, don't share information about employees with other employees unless explicitly allowed, for example. We our employee everybody in our group will flag if there's something that they're concerned about with regards to how we're treating somebody's data. So that's a very open conversation. Um, we're it's also There's also a very big culture of security as a result of that. We make sure we have two-factor authentication on everything, and we make sure that uh, we have password managers and everything, that everything is uh, tightly set up. With regards to what kind of people we hired, how to describe this? They're all very smart. Um, they're kind, um, hardworking, and they learn quickly and they're flexible. They're very good at what they do. We have a very high standard when it comes to who becomes our colleagues. Uh, but I don't know if every company would say that, right?
Yeah, and there is good reason for that. Very good people, I mean, very high quality people, usually are welcome at any company, and lots of those companies can offer a very good compensation package. So, what's your secret sauce to make them choose you?
Mm. A lot of them really believe in the vision and really believe in working on AI for good. I think it's also we don't micromanage. I guess that's more about why they stay rather than why they choose us. Uh, I think they can also see the high quality team that they're getting into, that they'll be respected, and they tend to work on things that are really interesting to them. In We try to find the right people for the right roles. You won't put somebody who hates working with data to work with data, right? You won't put a backend developer who's not interested in anything AI related to work on the backend of an AI system.
How do you fight the temptation to bring someone in just because there's lots of work that has to be done and there's no one to do it, lots of fires everywhere, versus still keeping this bar high?
We don't have too many fires. In fact, I don't think we have any fires, which is very rare for a startup. But because we spend so much time on code quality, uh, we have very little technical debt. And because we spend so much time making sure that the deployment is reliable, also the kind of customer service that we do is fairly fairly quick to iterate on. Um, how do we avoid it just takes so much more time to deal with somebody that we know isn't going to be a good fit than it does to wait and get the right fit.
This last sentence, does it come from experience?
I'm sure, but not too much experience of that, luckily.
I see. And in terms of the fires, there is another way to look at that. Somebody would say that, hey, maybe you're not growing fast enough if you don't have fires. If you're kind of comfortable managing everything, maybe you're just kind of not pushing it hard enough.
I would highly disagree with a privacy company who has to have reliable tech. Sure, if it's a Facebook or something like that,
I see.
whatever. But our customers are really reliant on our tech working because it's an integral part of their pipeline. And if our tech stops working, their customers are unhappy. So we can't afford to have those kind of fires.
It's a conscious trade-off of staying as stable and high quality as possible, even at the price of maybe growing at a different trajectory.
Yeah, and I mean, arguably, we're growing pretty quickly already, so better to have good, high quality growth that's stable than just flailing around and trying to, for no particular reason, increase your technical productivity, but not actually increasing your technical productivity because you'll have a bunch of engineers wasting their time putting out fires rather than working on the stuff that they should.
What do you see as the state of the privacy space today? What has been done well there, and what are the gaps?
A lot of people argue that uh, law is often behind uh, technological innovation. I'd say for the privacy space, law was ahead of technological innovation. And the really cool thing about that is that it spearheaded a bunch of technological innovation that we really needed to have. And because of that, now we have technology that we didn't even know uh, we would never have thought of before, right? Before, it was also a wild west with regards to how companies stored their data, what kind of data they collected, and with increasing cybersecurity breaches, that would have been that becomes worse and worse as time goes on. So basically, regulations like the GDPR said to companies, get your affairs in order and figure out how to build the technology to let you get your affairs in order. Um, with regards to, so we're on the right path with regards to how companies are starting to think about data privacy and about how to identify what's in their data in the first place. Where we're lacking in the privacy space is how to keep track of that data in an effective way. For example, if you are sharing data with a third party, how do you keep track of what kind of personal information you've included in there? And so your customers who uh, need to get you need to reply to access to information requests for or request to be forgotten. Um, I'm a lot of companies might not have uh, that kind of tracking mechanism in place for a number of reasons. Once you send your data to ChatGPT, for example, good luck trying to get your customers' data back from them. We'll see. So you should redact and de-identify your data before sending it through. Just saying. Um, Other things that are missing in the privacy space. I think just a general understanding of privacy enhancing technologies. It's still very that understanding is spinning up in pockets, and I feel like a lot of groups are spending a lot of time rediscovering what other people have already figured out. So I guess that happens uh, with things like that. Um, but understanding also not only which technologies are good for which problems, but understanding that it's not just like cybersecurity, you're striving for perfection, but you're not going to reach perfection. And you getting to um, you only doing something if it reaches perfection is uh, an example of the good is the enemy of the better.
And in terms of the role private AI will play in the next steps of evolution of our more private toward the more private world. What's your vision for it?
Yeah, the vision is really to build a privacy layer for software with developers in mind, creating very generalizable solutions that they can integrate within their environment, really minimizing the amount of information that needs to be shared. And what we want is for that to be directly within devices. What we want is for that to be directly within prem and private cloud. So you never have to share personal data that you don't have to with a third party. And ultimately being able to give control of that data at a minute level um, on a massive scale so that companies can finally unlock the value of the 80 to 90% of the data that they've collected over the years.
And that's a lot of data.
It's
Sounds
a
good.
lot of data. Yeah.
Patricia, where can listeners learn more about private AI? Where can they follow you on social media?
So we've got a Twitter underscore private AI. We've got LinkedIn, which we're slightly more active on. So you can find private AI on LinkedIn. Uh, and we do have a blog, so you can take a look at private-ai.com and look at our blog. Also, try out the web demo on there if you're curious.
Sounds good. We'll add all those links to the show notes. Patricia, thanks a lot for joining me today. It was a great pleasure to talk to you.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Artem. Thanks for having me.